listening to Impact Insights, a podcast from Impact, the annual magazine produced by The Telescope, Palomar College's student-run newspaper. On today's episode, I'm speaking to Art Department Chair and Professor Mark Hudelson. Hi Comets, I'm Svara Jayasinghe, Arts and Culture Editor at The Telescope. Today I am joined by Art Department Chair and Professor Mark Hudelson. If you want to say a quick hello.
Hello, quick hello.
Okay, so today we are here to talk about, shine a little spotlight on Professor Hudelson and his role here at Palomar. So first I would just like to ask you if you have a little bit more of a detailed intro of who you are at Palomar, if you'd like to say a few words.
Sure, yeah. So I've been here at Palomar since August of 1997, full-time. And before that, I taught for about 5 years part-time at a bunch of different community colleges. And I teach art history, which I love. And I've been department chair here since about 2016, so about 10 years as department chair. And I am counting down to retirement. Mm-hmm. I have one more year next year.
Wow.
Literally have an app on my phone that will tell me down to the minute how much more time I have left. So yeah, I'll finish up 30 years at the end of next year. And it's been great. I've loved Palomar. Great people to work with, wonderful students, and really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Massive accomplishment, 30 years. So we'll get a bit more into what led you to Palomar a bit later on, but I'd like to start by asking so again, you've been here nearly 30 years. I'd like to talk about just what are your favorite things about it? What have you learned over your time here? Mm-hmm. How has your time evolved, whether it's teaching, whether it's internal, what you've observed?
Okay. Yeah. So when I started off teaching as a full-time lecturer in art history, there's 5 classes you teach. So I got a chance to teach a lot of different classes. We have an intro class that covers the entire history of art in one semester, and then we have classes that divide the history of art into smaller chunks, and you get more in depth. Mm-hmm. So I've always loved teaching art history. I've always been kind of a history nerd, and then being able to teach art history, you're teaching about history with the visuals of the art. And I find students are able to connect better with history when they're looking at an object from that time period. Mm-hmm. So the art plus the history, that is the perfect marriage for me. And in the past, when I was just teaching and not department chair, I taught 5 classes. So that, full-time was lecture prep and grading and whatnot. Mm. Now as department chair, I teach 2 classes. And in the time I would have been teaching, the other 3 is a lot of administrative kind of department chair kind of stuff, which not my favorite stuff. I don't think anyone gets into teaching to be a department chair, because right. It's different than what the job description you were hired for mm-hmm. is. But I've got to know great people throughout the college that I would not have met otherwise without being chair. And having a very easy set of colleagues to work with who are friends, it makes the job that much easier. And within the art department, everyone really pulls their own weight and pitches in to help. So from a colleague perspective, it's a fun place to work in the art department, and students are fantastic. I love getting feedback during class time and discussion, and I just enjoy the entire thing. I started off thinking I wanted to be an artist, and then realized I didn't really have that much talent at making art. So my freshman year at UC Irvine, I switched from a studio art major to being art history, and that I loved because for me, studio art there's kind of a subjective element to it. Yeah. And when I took drawing and painting and printmaking and ceramics classes, and it wasn't always clear to me what you had to do to get a good grade. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I stepped into an art history class, it was here you go. Here's the tests, and here's the percentage, and here's the paper, and there's your grade. So that clarity I enjoyed a lot. And then that's what I tried to bring into teaching, was to be maybe overly clear. My syllabus, I think, is 24 pages now. Wow. But, I try to really tell students the first day, this is what the class is about. Here's how you'll be graded at the end of the semester. Mm-hmm. And take away a lot of the guesswork. I think that's what I did not like as a student, was classes where it was unclear how your grade was arrived at or computed, and unclear exactly what you needed to do. So like I said, probably go overboard, but I try to be clear as to what's expected students. So
yes. And as a student, we appreciate it. Like I would take a 24-page syllabus over like not knowing what's going on any day.
I have to apologize the first day because I know, as soon as I pass it out, I see the eyes get big.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I know this looks intimidating, but it's for your benefit.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll answer your questions. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned like you were originally like you are a bit of a history nerd, so and like that's kind of evolved into an interest in art. But I like to go back to like when did you discover that? Like what led you to art and art history specifically? I know you touched on this a bit, but if you have a bit more detail on it.
Yeah, I had so when I was at UC Irvine, I had a professor who was one of the first editors-in-chief at Art News magazine, which is like the preeminent art periodical. And he was so good. He taught at Berkeley and at UC Irvine. And weekly, he would fly between the two campuses.
That's crazy.
And I had a lecture class. There must have been like 200 people in the class. But he was just captivating. And being able to look at a work of art and learn about the time period, I found fascinating. But then it was almost like Da Vinci Code, where you start learning about little symbols and meanings and layers of meanings in works of art. And I found that just fascinating. So yeah. I think the various depth and avenues you can go with art history, I found very appealing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yeah, the power of a good professor, like...
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So looking back at, again, I took a very in-depth study of your LinkedIn.
Uh-oh.
So
That's
I do
scary.
know that like once you graduated and you got like your teaching license and everything, you did teach at a few different like institutions,
Right.
but then you briefly did work as a screenwriter. And if we could pause and just tell the audience really quick, where did that interest start? Because for context, Professor Hudelson has, I'm sure you've done more on your own time, but you have like 3, would you call them manuscripts or just scripts?
Screenplays.
3 screenplays that he's like written, and we'll get more into one of them specifically. But I would like to talk about like where did that interest start as a hobby, and then what led you to do that professionally for a bit, and then what led you back to education.
Yeah, I've kind of done the screenwriting parallel to the teaching, so I've taught full time my entire adult life. Okay. But I picked up screenwriting in the 90s, I think the mid to late 90s. And I've always been a movie buff. I love movies. And I picked up a book at a bookstore that was, this is pre-internet, that was a paperback of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. And is it Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs? And I read the screenplay format and thought, this is genius. It's like taking a film, breaking it down to its bare essentials, just dialogue and short description. And I loved it. I mean, I could visualize in this very sparse, concise prose what it was the screenwriter was trying to say. So I thought, I'd never thought of myself as a novelist. And I couldn't do that, but I thought, this I could do. I love movies. Teaching art history is telling a story with pictures, which translates very well to screenwriting. So I took a stab at a screenplay, talk about that later maybe, but enjoyed writing it and wrote it what is called on spec. You write it on speculation because no one's paying you to write it. So maybe someone will buy it, maybe someone won't. But regardless of that, I just love the process because I got to see the whole movie I wanted to see as I wrote it. And loved that, wrote a second one. In fact, both. The first one I wrote on my own time while teaching. The second one I wrote while on sabbatical here at Palomar. So that was nice to have an uninterrupted semester just to do the writing. And then I wrote the third script while also on sabbatical at Palomar. So so it's always been kind of parallel to the teaching. And in the case of 2 of the 3 scripts, they deal with works of art. So when I get to those works of art in class, I get to talk a little bit about screenwriting. And I always have students who are writers at some point. And so I get to kind of connect with some students over that too, which is fun.
Yeah, I was going to bring up like how a couple of the scripts are like inspired by artwork and stuff. So do you find like when you got the ideas for that, were you like teaching or something and that's just how it came to you? Does that continue now? Like I don't know if you are working on something now or if you plan on doing so, but does it just come to you like through your work as a professor?
Yes. Yeah. That's the big part of it. The first script I wrote in the late 90s, it's called Missing Mona Lisa. And I'd been through undergraduate, graduate school, never once heard the story that the Mona Lisa was stolen back in 1911 from the Louvre. So I thought, my gosh, that's fascinating. So I read more about it and the guy who stole it, and he kept the painting for 2 years. The whole world was looking for it. And there was a manhunt, and they were searching, and they had fingerprints but no match. And meanwhile, this guy who worked at the Louvre, who was an Italian working in Paris, he takes the painting back to his hotel in Paris, keeps it there for about a year and a half, and then he takes the painting, smuggles it down to Florence, and lives with it there for a few months before contacting the famous museum in Florence, the Uffizi Gallery, and says, I have the Mona Lisa, which the world has been looking for 2 years.
Right.
So they couldn't believe it, and they finally verify it's the authentic deal, and he has a trial. They ask him, why did you do this? And he said, I wanted her back in Italy where she belongs. It's this painting of an Italian woman by an Italian Leonardo. Yeah. Why is it in Paris? It should be back in Italy. The whole, in my head as I read that, I thought this is almost like a love story between a guy and a painting. And it's also kind of, a mystery of who had it. There's a lot of elements that were cinematic in my mind when I kind of visually saw it. So after seeing that example of screenplay format, I thought, okay, let me take a stab at this. That was the first script I wrote, Missing Mona.
Okay, yes. So we were going to specifically talk about Missing Mona Lisa specifically. I actually didn't know about the theft either until I read about it on your page. Really interesting, very touching, and I also think a big conversation in art, because I don't know if you've ever heard people making fun of the British Museum, because so much of it is just not from there.
Right.
And people being take that statue back where it belongs in Athens and everything. I just have to ask, because Missing Mona Lisa is about theft from the Louvre. When the Louvre theft happened last year, did you have any feelings on it?
Other than a little bit of deja vu. So when the Mona Lisa was stolen, they questioned Pablo Picasso, who was in Paris at the time. And it turns out that Picasso and his friend Apollinaire, who was a poet, would go to the Louvre, which had lax security, and they would pick up little Iberian ancient Spanish sculptures, put them in their pocket, and walk out the door.
Wow.
So when they found out about that, they interviewed Picasso and asked him about, did you steal the Mona Lisa? And he said no, but he confessed to the other stuff he had stolen. So when I heard about the recent theft at the Louvre, I thought, well, this is not new. There's it's such a gigantic museum that things are, admittedly, it's a hard place to guard. And with modern technology, it's not so hard, but historically, it's been a hard place to make sure everything is where it should be. But with the recent theft, the producer who owns my script now used that to kind of jumpstart pre-production on the script.
Yes.
So although I didn't see it at first, the producer said, oh, here's a great marketing opportunity. It's in the news again, and let's try to get talent attached to it. So that's where they're at right now.
Yes. And then perfect segue, actually. So Professor Hudelson's script for Missing Mona Lisa is in pre-production at Larry Thompson Entertainment,
correct.
I think.
Yeah, very good.
Yes. And if I'm correct, I was looking at some news articles about it. The script got picked up in 2013. Is that right?
Yeah, 2013 or 14, yeah.
Okay. And then it entered pre-production October of 2025.
Hollywood is funny. So when I wrote the script, I had a different producer and production companies who optioned it. And optioning means they give you X amount of dollars and they own the rights to the script for a finite amount of time, typically 18 months. And at the end of the 18 months, if they haven't set anything up, they can ask you to extend it. So with a previous producer, I had optioned it several times back to back. And then it was kind of lost. This producer had it, but wasn't doing anything with it. So Larry Thompson Entertainment, he came in, got control of the script, and I optioned it to him for a number of years. And then finally, he just outright purchased it. So now that he owns it, I have no more say on what happens with it.
Yeah.
And he's kind in that he keeps me in the loop and lets me know what's going on. And but it's really out of my hands now, so I try to not not think about it too
Yeah.
much. It's like you make your little baby and then it goes off, and now, if something happens, great, but if not, that's what I expect. And in Hollywood, pre-production is kind of code for, we have a script we're ready to go with, but we don't have talent attached to it.
Yeah.
So a script, technically my script has been in pre-production since the late 1990s. So,
Wow.
there's very small chance that scripts there's a very small chance of scripts getting optioned, and then smaller still getting purchased, and then smaller for then going into production. So, I don't expect, the odds are it will not get made, but it's gone further than I thought it ever would. So that's fun.
Yeah, so you kind of answered my next question, but like, since it's kind of been a long process of like, maybe it's going to be turned into a movie, maybe not. What was that like waiting period like? Because you said like, it was my baby, now I'm handing it off. So is it just kind of like, okay, I made this thing I'm proud of, and I'm glad it got to this point, but I'm not going to like sweat, or I'm not going to like, spend time ruminating over like what happens to it. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. You have to, within Hollywood, writers have a lot of power until they have optioned or sold their script.
Yeah.
And unless you are a writer-director or you're also producing, once it's been optioned or sold, you have no say. So knowing that, I just kind of mentally divorced myself of it once it was sold. And like I said, the current producer is nice, and he involves me in it when something's happening. But I don't have any expectation of anything happening with it.
So I want to go in a little bit more to that, a bit more generally. So I'm assuming like when you write this, you are writing it purely like for yourself.
Yes.
And I think that's a really interesting thing. And I was wondering like if you have any more thoughts to say on it, because I feel like that's a big conversation with like artists today of like making content for like money or like kind of not fame necessarily, but recognition versus like doing it for yourself. Because so many people who are trying to be artists today, it's like, well, I want to do this as my career, but I can't really make money off of it unless I'm like doing everything for social media or constantly selling it. So like, did you ever struggle with that?
The thing that was fortunate for me was having the full-time job here at Palomar.
Yeah.
Because now I've got a paycheck, now I've got benefits, I have 3 kids and a wife. So I would never have given up teaching to write. It crossed my mind, this is a lot of fun, I could do this full-time. But practically speaking, no.
Yeah.
This allows me the luxury of writing only what I want and when I want. Whereas if you're a professional screenwriter, you may be writing the stuff you love, your spec scripts, constantly, but you're writing a Hallmark movie, or you're writing a commercial, or you're doing stuff that you may not be into, but you're doing it to pay the bills. And that doesn't appeal to me. I didn't want to write things that I don't want to write. So the teaching thing in conjunction with the writing has been like the perfect situation for me.
Have you noticed like any of that sort of thing within your students? Because you said like you have some students who like to write. I feel like that's very common within art. Like you have people across many different like facets of it.
Yeah.
So have you ever like picked that up like with your students having a similar thing?
Yeah, I've had a few students who also are into screenwriting or taking screenwriting courses. My son, my middle child, my son, is a student at Chapman at the Dodge Film School over there, majoring in screenwriting. So I get to kind of live vicariously through him, and he tells me about what he's writing, and he's working on sets and stuff. I just love, I'm so proud of all the stuff he's doing, all my kids. But when I talk to students here, some of the things you wouldn't learn in a class about screenwriting and the way that options work and what to look out for, that's been an area where I can kind of give a little bit of advice on. And I'm not immersed in it day to day, but I had some meetings at Miramax that were really interesting, and with different producers. And there was a letter that was sent to Leonardo DiCaprio to ask him to star in it.
Wow.
So I got these little kind of side little tidbits that were happening on the fringes that I was allowed to hear about, and that was fun. To me, the whole Hollywood screenwriting part of it is just fun to dip my big toe into. It's not something I want to rely on to pay the mortgage. So in talking about scripts, so the first script is based on the theft of the Mona Lisa, and that relates directly to the subject matter I teach, which is good. And then the second script I wrote, which was on sabbatical here, is called The Raft of the Medusa,
Yes.
which is my favorite painting. It's in the Louvre. It's huge. It's 16 by 23 feet. The guy who painted it, Theodore Géricault, was a French painter in the early 1800s, and he wanted to paint an epic scale painting of something contemporary to his time, as opposed to historical, religious subject matter, things like that. So during his lifetime, there was a French ship that ran aground off the coast of West Africa, and there was a makeshift raft constructed that a lot of people died on, and there was cannibalism and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I thought that would be a good movie. You know, to me, personally, watching films, I love films based on true stories. Those always seem like, oh my gosh, that's crazier than what you can make up. So in preparing for lectures about the Raft of the Medusa painting, I got into the story of it. And two of the survivors on the raft wrote a book that was published, and you can buy it on Amazon today. Narrative of a Voyage to Senegal. So Senegal and West Africa is where they were going. So that book, when it was published in France in the early 1800s, became a huge sensation. And that's what the painter then based the painting on. And to make it realistic, he went to the local morgue and brought back dead bodies in his studio and posed them on a raft he constructed to accurately capture death on a raft, and brought back severed heads of guillotined prisoners from the local prison, and just crazy stuff like that. So that's why I thought, this is so visual, this could be so cinematic. So that's the second script I wrote, was based on that. And what I find to kind of connect up screenwriting and teaching is that in the course of researching for a script, it better informs my teaching.
Yeah.
And vice versa. When I research for a lecture, I get ideas and think, this would be a great idea. Like, I have a few other scripts that I've outlined based on art history events. So
yeah, it's pretty cool, like, to be just have that sort of like the inspiration for the two passions just like kind of intertwined very nicely with each other.
Yeah, they both dovetail. Yeah.
Okay. I would like to go back to teaching for a minute, unless you want to talk about your third script.
The third script is it's an action adventure based on the Three Wise Men story. And that connects with, again, art history. There's a Gothic cathedral in Germany, Cologne Cathedral, and they have inside of it a shrine that has the bones of the Three Wise Men. And so I started looking at relics and churches and what these objects are and why people build cathedrals around them and pilgrims travel for miles to come see them. And so the whole Three Wise Men story became fascinating. I always like stories about people or events on the periphery of a larger story.
Yeah.
So the Mona Lisa, everyone knows about the Mona Lisa, but no one knows it was stolen. How interesting is that? And with the Three Wise Men, there's like the whole, and I show a lot of paintings of Nativity, Christ's birth. Those are famous. There's always these three guys in the corner. It's like, who are those guys? Like, why did they travel so far to go see this baby? So that could be a story. So, yeah, so that's the script I just finished. And then as I was writing it, I thought, there are built-in sequels for this, so I'm working on the next two sequels for that one.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I think you may have answered this already, but you've been here nearly 30 years. I keep repeating that. Hope it's not weird.
This makes me feel old. That's okay.
So the phrasing of this question might sound also a little strange, but like, what kept you here so long? Not that we're not like lucky to have you, but like, what drew you to Palomar's community and its students, and why did you choose to stay with it as long as you have?
Right. I got my master's degree in 1992, and then I started teaching part-time as an adjunct and taught at a bunch of different community colleges: Santa Monica, Orange Coast, Saddleback College, Rio Hondo, Cerritos, etc., and had an opportunity through part-time teaching to see what a lot of art departments are like, and student bodies and college administrations, and each college has its own kind of flavor to it in a way. And I had met some people who had been teaching part-time for a long time, and I thought, I don't think I can teach part-time for a long time.
Yeah.
Because especially when I was doing it, now there's benefits for adjunct. When I did it, there was none, and the pay was horrible, nowhere near full-time. And I was teaching, I think, four or five different colleges each semester just to get close to what a full-time professor would make. So I gave myself 5 years. I said at the end of 5 years, if I can't find a full-time position, then I'll do something else. I grew up as a kid from junior high through college working at my dad's warehouse. He had a plumbing supply company, so it was either teaching or plumbing supplies. So so at the end of that 5 years is when there was advertisements for full-time positions here at Palomar, and also a college where I had taught at for years, Cerritos College up in Norwalk. So I was a finalist for both of those, and I more expected to get the Cerritos job. And in the end, I didn't get it. And Palomar offered me the position. And I thought it was funny that I had made it as far as I did in the interview process here, because I had never taught here before, didn't know anything about the college. And I went to the interview with the expectation of just building my interview skills. I thought, here's a chance to just get better at interviewing. And because I didn't really care about how well I did better than most other interviews that I was in. So I was loose and had fun, and connected with the colleagues who were interviewing me. And there's a fantastic professor, Dr. Fred Levine, who was teaching full-time art history when I was hired. He retired, I think, about 10 years ago. But just from the moment he picked me up in the waiting room to pull me back to the interview room, we were already smiling. And I thought I could work with this guy side by side easy. And he was a great mentor. And so I just loved it. I mean, it was a great place to teach. And obviously, once you have tenure, which is about a 4-year process here, you have a very secure job. And the benefits are fantastic. The retirement is great. Most jobs you don't really get a retirement. This one had a great one through the state. And my wife is a first grade teacher, so we both had summers off. We get similar breaks, which is nice. And after years of doing undergrad, plus I was 3 years to get my master's. I did another year after that to get my teaching credential, thinking I wanted to teach high school. I don't know why. I thought that, but I got a teaching credential, 2 of them. But I was kind of in that rhythm of I work and do school, and then I have summer off. So I kind of like that rhythm. And I thought, gosh, what a great thing to do that as a full-time job and get summers off. So I actually taught summers initially, but once our first kid was born in 2000, then I stopped teaching summers at that point. So the security and the benefits, especially once you start having a family, that's a really important factor in it.
I want to talk a bit about your teaching philosophy, because for people who might be listening, I feel like as students, I don't know, our relationships with our professors and stuff like that can be a bit interesting. I want to talk about how do you approach teaching students, being a mentor? How do you kind of guide them? Has that changed over time? How do you approach being a professor?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of beginning college instructors do this. I started teaching with a visual of my community college students as graduate art history students, because that's what I just was. So the initial exams I was making were way beyond what was needed for community college. And I had to kind of, after a couple of years, recalibrate and say, okay, these are students who are not art majors. Once in a while I'll have an art major, but very few. And even those who are art majors, very few are art history majors. There's a lot of painting studio majors and whatnot. So I had to kind of rethink what my audience was. And once I did that, then things worked better. My goal then was not to turn out little mini art historians, but to turn out students who are more visually literate, more aware culturally through art. That became more of a goal. And then I wanted it to be fun. I wanted students to enjoy it. I wanted them to go on and, one of the art classes we have here at Palomar is Art 100, the very first class, if you're looking in the art department classes, and it's an introduction to art class that I teach and other people too. And I don't want that first exposure to art for non-art majors to be boring. I don't want it to be, drowning them over their head in reading and papers. So I tried to always keep in mind this is a lower division class. It's non-art majors. I assume that my students have zero art knowledge walking in, and just make it interesting.
Yeah.
Just be fun and passionate, which I am, and hopefully that rubs off a bit. And then students like it, and maybe take some art history classes or other art studio classes that we have in the department, and go on from there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's so important. Like, I feel like to meet like students where they're at. I feel like sometimes in entry level courses, I've had like professors expect all of this, and I'm like, this is entry level. I don't know what's going on at all.
Yeah.
So I'm sure your students really appreciate that. That's it for this episode of Impact Insights. If you want to hear more conversations like this, visit the-telescope.com for more coverage, podcasts, and the latest issue of Impact. Thanks for listening.